Good afternoon. We're going to get underway here just so that hopefully we can see everybody in the room. We are in the Reducing Food Waste in the Retail Sector panel. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves here. We will do sort of short introductions with what each of the organizations is doing, and then as we're talking, if you could write down any questions that you have. We're going to have folks coming around the room to collect questions so that we can do that in sort of an organized fashion. We will probably spend most of our time answering questions and engaging. We don't intend to have really much in the way of presentation here. It's much more open discussion and trying to get to a place where maybe we get some more understanding of what's happening. Yes?
Just so everybody knows, there are index cards on the table.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear, sorry, that's a great clarification. There are white index cards on all the tables for your questions, and we'll have folks come around and pick those up. Catherine, you have a mic, okay.
Would you like me to begin?
Yeah, sure,
Excellent.
Thank you.
Hi, you guys. I'm Catherine D'Amato from the Greater Boston Food Bank. It's nice to see all of you at 4 o'clock that just want to go to the bar, and I really appreciate that you're here. Hopefully you had a cookie or a cup of coffee. But no, most of the folks on the panel work either within the Feeding America system as a food bank or through partners like BJ's who are here as donors and philanthropists and corporate responsibility, and obviously FMI, and obviously you, for all kinds of good things that are here. But the Greater Boston Food Bank, like other food banks in the system of Feeding America across the country, we're the largest hunger relief organization in New England. We distribute about 46 million meals through about 57 to 60 million pounds. We serve 190 cities and towns. So issues around food recovery and food waste are uniquely different in each one of those 190 cities and towns and how they address it. We personally, we serve about 550 agencies. 1 in 9 individuals in Eastern Mass is using the system. About 1 in 6 is food insecure. All the things that you sort of know of. But years ago, I've been with the Greater Boston Food Bank for about 20 years, was with Western Massachusetts, a rural food bank before, and then started the San Francisco Food Bank in 1979. So I'm an old, sagey food person. And I love the excitement that I see here. I love the invention and the innovation and the emerging models and the discussion. Because we're going to do what we do, and we're going to do it really well, but we're not the answer. We're part of the solution, but not the only solution. So we do handle food in a variety of ways, from trailer loads, large shipments coming in multiple ways because of either overproduction, test market, production error, et cetera. And then we scale all the way down to very small retail rescue efforts. But what we've learned is that we're not very good at the littles. We're really good at the bigs. So from a business perspective, we actually got out of the door-to-door pickup of food rescue and do what we call enabling. So we have those 550 agencies. They're trained in food safety. The relationships are on the ground, and they pick up that product. We also signed a memorandum of agreement with Lovin' Spoonfuls, and actually sort of over here to my left, because they do well in that. And we want to support them, and we work collaboratively. And I think that is, if anything, the answer going forward in this is to maximize all these amazing creative models. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's a lot of really interesting things happening. And to know what you do best, and to partner with others that do what they do best. And I feel like I'm back in Berkeley, San Francisco in 1972. I'm right back in the thick of it. I haven't left, but like 40 years plus have gone by. And I'm still sitting here going, gosh, marijuana's legal now, got it. Gay marriage is legal, got it. Kefir is really good for you and on aisle 7 in every major store, got it. Okay, what has changed? You're still here, Jose, and others. So I think the conversation is shifting. And so I'll stop there. Happy to take questions as we get there to listen to my colleagues.
Thanks so much. My name is Kate McKenzie, and I'm with City Harvest in New York City. Like Catherine's group, we're a food rescue organization. We'll rescue 55 million pounds of food this year that would otherwise go to waste. We also work and distribute it to kitchens and pantries throughout the city. We also work in neighborhoods that are struggling with food insecurity but don't necessarily have to turn to emergency food networks. So help grocery stores, whether it's stock and increase the supply chains to those stores so that they can stock and sell great produce at affordable prices. And in particular, I want to, we like to say that we pioneered food rescue some 33 years ago because we were the world's first food rescue organization and still remain to be New York's only. But that kind of, talking point aside, one of the things that continues to weave its way through our organization is our interest in doing more with less. And this opportunity around food waste is something that we're trying to, we've done some environmental analyses to figure out that if you capture all of the pounds of food that we've rescued and of course with the quantities broken down, it's the equivalent of about 500,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, which is about 100,000 cars off the road per year. So we're really interested in translating the classic kind of anti-hunger messages into a more environmental message. So we're really eager to do that. And also I would say this is a newish role for us, but I'll look at a few people in the room like Tristram Stewart and Joanne Berkenkamp. We play sort of an ombuds role in connecting the movement of food waste to anti-hunger in a way that is connecting that to our mayor's office and working with our mayor's office on their amazing and very progressive food waste strategies to make sure that they're capturing and understanding the implications around food insecurity and food rescue and relief work in a very major way, and sort of lend our, brand credibility to this work in a way that opens doors and opens pockets in some ways that is really important. And finally, I will say that one of the things that I hope to talk a bit about is the bottleneck in the system and making sure that we are eyes wide open about the fact that certainly wasted food is not going to really make a dent in hunger in this country, but also that it's not quite as simple as saying, here's all the food that's possible to rescue, and getting it to soup kitchens and food pantries is quite a challenge. And what I will, just as an illustration to that, we rescue a lot of food from the Hunts Point Terminal Market in the Bronx. We do that 3 days a week, not because there's only food available 3 days a week, but because soup kitchens and food pantries in the Bronx cannot take more food right now than what we're able to provide to them because they don't have the infrastructure to take that food. So it's a really important point. The ReFed report calls out the need for infrastructure investments. I'm not going to go into that now because I really want to just dialogue with everyone. But that's a little bit about why City Harvest is interested in the conversations around food waste.
Hello, I'm Jessie Newman. I'm with BJ's Wholesale Club and have been with BJ's for 7.5 years. I came from Colorado. BJ's is headquartered here in the Boston area. I came from Colorado where I worked for a restaurant company where we worked with Food Donation Connection to donate our surplus restaurant food. And when I was leaving Colorado, there's a Feeding America contact who lives in Colorado, Eric Davis, who said, I'd love to talk to you when you get to Boston because we've got this new program we're doing with Walmart, and I think it'd be great if you guys could donate the food at BJ's. And I thought, does Eric want us to, one of the parts of the Food Donation Connection program is you have to cook the food before you donate it. And I thought, how am I going to get our clubs to cook a side of beef before we donate it? It's just not going to happen. And he assured me that raw product was something that we could donate. And I thought, well, give me a year to get myself situated, and I'll get you started and figure out what we could do. So as Eric likes to say, almost a year to the day, I called him and I said, I think we're ready. And there were a couple of things that had happened at BJ's in that first year. First, our general counsel was on Catherine's board at the Greater Boston Food Bank, and I think that the impact of the Walmart donations and Target and Kroger and all the other big companies was starting to really be felt by the food bank network. And then also our CEO at the time was on the board of the Pine Street Inn, which is an agency here in the Boston area that's a member agency of the Greater Boston Food Bank. So we had an interest from the perspective of our audience. And for any retailer that's in the room, I can tell you that I've met with literally every department in the company about this program, whether it touches it or not, because there was such a concern. In the retail sector, you are, and I think Jose can probably attest to this, you are the best at what you do if you do systems, if you work processes, and if your team is trained on doing something one way. And so when you suggest a change in your process, which in our case was diverting food that was going into the garbage into a new system, and you're going to have a whole new slew of people picking up at the back door, it creates fear and anxiety and confusion. And so it took a lot of effort to create a system change. But within a year, we had piloted the program in the Boston market and then also in the Ohio market. That's a remote area for us, so it was a safe place for us to do some testing. And we did it for meat and produce. And for us, meat is poultry, beef, seafood. And then in the wholesale club model, BJ's is like a Costco or a Sam's Club, if you don't know it. We only really sell bagged produce, and we don't sell individual units except for bananas. So we were lucky, and it took us a year, but we rolled it out across our 200 clubs from Maine to Florida. And then about a year later, Feeding America came to us and said, what about that dairy department that you said you wanted to wait a year on? And I said, oh, you're right. I did say we'd give it a try in a year. And so dairy was a little bit harder because we got into much more stringent date labeling issues, and that was a challenge for us. But today we're proud to say that after about 6 months, we were able to start donating liquid dairy, hard cheese, soft cheese, cream cheese, yogurt, eggs. And then in our space, dairy also includes refrigerated dough and juices and stuff like that. But what we started to see at that point in our visits with the food banks was the need for infrastructure for agencies. And Catherine alluded to that agencies were becoming a very vital form of pickup. And so when we were visiting with the food banks and then also with their agencies, we noticed that some were only picking up 1 day a week. And our program requires that the agencies pick up 3 days a week. Otherwise, we're holding waste and then throwing it away. People are not using it. So we decided to take some money that we had in our foundation and combine it and use it with Feeding America to make a gift that allowed us to enable agency and agency capacity. And so we gifted $700,000 across 30 food banks in honor of our 30th anniversary as a company, and started to help agencies open their doors more frequently, have trained staff, provide them with freezers and refrigerators and cooling devices that they can use for transport, and IT systems that help them record the food and then report it up to the food banks and then up into Feeding America. And we repeated that grant again last year. We're thinking about repeating it again this year. And I'm proud to say that a program that has helped us with an issue that we had, which was a lot of food that we were throwing away, unfortunately, has now resulted in us donating 1 million pounds of food every month, and that is perishable food. That doesn't count our bread. We don't even record our bread in the numbers that we talk about. So it's a pretty remarkable effect, and it also happens to help us stay compliant with the new organics laws that are here in the Northeast. It allows us to take a tax credit, and then also, believe it or not, allows us to pay a lot less money in our hauling costs. So it's been a win-win-win program. And I think one of the only ways it's remained a win-win-win program through executive leadership changes and everything else has been its proven track record as far as a cost savings for the company. But believe it or not, it's the hourly employees in our clubs who've really made this program stay alive. They're passionate. They hated throwing the food away before, and they've just been tremendous supporters of the program to date. So that's the BJ's story.
Hi, I'm Andy Herrig. I'm senior director of Sustainability, Tax and Trade at the Food Marketing Institute. For those of you who don't know, FMI is a trade association that represents food wholesalers and retailers, and that's everyone from mom and pop grocery stores with one store all the way up to Fortune 500 companies like Walmart and Target. In 2011, FMI joined with the grocery manufacturers and the National Restaurant Association to form the Food Waste Recovery Alliance, which was a group dedicated to trying to reduce waste within the supply chain and also get more food to people. And that has been our sort of primary vehicle for working on food waste over the past 6 years. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a 60,000-foot view of the industry. I'm going to do this a little backwards and start with the good news. In 2015, the retail industry donated about 1.4 billion pounds of food to food banks across the country, which we're very proud of. To give you a sense of what that means, in 2006, that number was 140 million pounds. So in a little bit over a decade, a little bit less than a decade rather, we were able to increase our donations tenfold. I should say that that's not just food that otherwise would have gone to waste. It's also donations that were made because there was need. So we are obviously very proud of that figure, and we encourage our members to work with Feeding America, with whom we have a long-time relationship, to try to increase those numbers, and if they don't have programs, to set them up. The bad news, and we've got these numbers through the FWRA and our surveys of our members. Right now within the industry, for every $1,000 of revenue we generate, we also generate about 10 pounds of food waste. And that's a lot. We don't particularly like talking about those numbers, but we think it's important that they're out there and that people are aware of where we're at as an industry. We also think it's probably a ceiling. So we feel very good about our efforts. Unfortunately, right now, of those 10 pounds of waste, only about 40% are donated or covered in some way. So there's a lot of work to do for this industry. And that's actually pretty evenly divided between feed donations, animal feed, and composting. So obviously, as we work to try to fulfill not only the USDA, the national goal, but we also have the industry goal of trying to reduce food waste by 50% in 2030. A lot of work to do, but we feel very good about the efforts we've made. We've got great members in the retail industry who obviously are very dedicated to not only donation, but also to other forms of recovery, I think, as you'll hear today. And so we look forward to answering any questions y'all have.
Hi, I'm Casey Harris. I work for Hannaford Supermarkets, which is part of Delhaize America. So Hannaford operates 189 grocery stores in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and Massachusetts. And we also have Food Lion, which is based in Salisbury, North Carolina, that has about 1,100 stores. So Delhaize America has about 1,200 stores in the U.S. I primarily focus on Hannaford. And I think I would probably share a lot of what everybody already said, so I'm going to try to keep it short. Hannaford's current efforts right now around food waste and food donations, we, I guess what I would say is sort of different than what we've heard already today is we've been focusing a lot on associate engagement. And so at our stores, we have a focus on moving to zero waste, and we talk about food waste a lot. Being a commercial generator of food waste, we're going to talk about that. So we have the EPA food waste hierarchy posted in every store. We have it worked into our associate training. We have sustainability champions at every single store. We have food donation programs, as you can imagine a grocery store would, that we're very committed to. But I think the associate engagement is sort of the most unique piece for me to talk about today. And I can answer questions and do current challenges and innovation and all that other stuff. But
So maybe to start with, we can go to this employee engagement thing. One of the things that yesterday we had this food recovery entrepreneurs workshop all day. And one of the things that came out of that workshop was the importance of getting employees engaged in these sorts of efforts. And I highlighted the work that Starbucks has done. I think somebody mentioned Starbucks earlier today, but Starbucks has been working in Kings County, Seattle, for the last couple of years in recovering their sandwiches and salads, et cetera. And I've had conversations with them about potentially doing a case study about what they've done. And one of the things that's really, I think, pretty fascinating about their work is that the entirety of that program was driven by the employees who were really pretty upset about the level of food waste that was being generated in the Starbucks store. And what they told me on the initial phone call I had with them was that of all the initiatives they've ever rolled out in Starbucks, the highest engagement ever that they've had from employees was this particular rollout in Kings County for food recovery. So this idea of being able to get not just the attention, but the energy, the passion, the motivation of local employees is really, I think, a very important part of this food donation, food waste piece. Andy, I guess I'll ask you the question. How prevalent do you see very many of the folks in your organization, the members in your organization, taking the sort of approach that Hannaford has taken or that Starbucks has taken? Or it sounds to me like BJ's is also in that vein as well. What does that look like in the broader grocery world? And well, maybe you can answer that question. I think it'd be useful.
Sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is in dealing with our members, I would say in probably well more than half the cases where these programs are set up, it doesn't come from the C-suite down. It comes from an employee who's passionate about the issue. And it can be something like they saw a news story. It could be that they drove past a food pantry and they saw a line and they couldn't believe the need in their town. And they pushed that up the ladder and said, we need to do this. So again, that often is the starting point, is that employee passion. But I think to really get these programs to work well, you have to have those employees engaged. And I think that's the one lesson that people learn really quickly, because it has to, the systems that are in place, they're not arduous, but they do require that you follow through on them. And if the employees aren't engaged and if they don't feel passionate about it, it's gonna jam up, it's gonna bottleneck. So I do think that's the one lesson we tell people, particularly when they're launching these programs, is to really let the employees have rein to their passion and give them, sort of empower them to follow through on this stuff, because otherwise you sort of set yourself up for failure.
Is there any best practice manual that has been set up by the industry? Because one of the things that I'm hearing from both BJ's and Hannaford is lots of employee engagement and some interesting things that you're doing. Is there any kind of industry benchmark, standard, best practice that is shared across the industry? And if not, is that something that could happen to spark even more? Because you talked about the level of food recovery and how you want to keep moving that forward. Is that something that's happening now or could happen as part of industry cooperation?
There are best practices out there that Feeding America has worked with us that you can find on their website. A lot of them do address this issue of how you get your employees engaged, but maybe not to the extent they need to. I think that's an interesting point to raise. Because again, in 2006, 140 million pounds, 2015, 1.4 billion. There's a lot of lessons learned along the way too. And I think to how we sort of take those and spread them out throughout the industry, I think is an important question, because that's going to be how we expand.
How do you get to the next level?
Forward. Exactly.
Yeah.
I would just add, similar to that, a place where there may be an opportunity, especially for a large-scale, multi-state retailer, would be a best practice guide on zero waste, because I think many people take it and run with it in their own way, and there are probably a lot of lessons that could be learned. I think in this food space, I'm grateful that Walmart has talked to us. We actually modeled our program on doing it exactly opposite of their program. Target will talk to us anytime we want to. Kroger's, we toured a Kroger's in Colorado. It also helped me check on my house that was being rented at the time. We toured a Kroger's in Colorado to get a sense of what their meat program looked like. So the collaboration across the sector has been really inspiring, and I'm grateful that these big businesses that we compete with on so many levels have been willing to not compete in this space and have been willing to share best practices.
I would agree with you. I would agree with what's been said as to model. I think one of the, when you're on the receiving side of the donation, one of the challenges is there could be turnover in the stores, so the continuity of the education and how it works. We have found, and others may have as well, is we have to put more people, and City Harvest does this beautifully, more people on the ground, talking in those stores, building the relationship so that when that turn happens, you don't lose the contribution. I think the other side that we're missing is the vulnerability of the agencies, that they are not always, they're voluntary. 51% of the pantries are volunteer-based. So John is sick today, doesn't come. And they don't necessarily think I've got to call either the food bank to send somebody else, or I'm going to call BJ's to tell them I'm not going to be there, so give it to somebody else. So there are some really vulnerable spots, even though the systems are well thought out. But continuity and consistency is a big part of the success, I think, at least for us on the other end.
I was just going to say, in terms of engagement, I don't really think I think the engagement's there, at least, for Hannaford, we have 27,000 associates, and, in general, I'm speaking in total general terms, and I don't have HR stats, but, it's a younger generation that's working at the grocery stores, and, I have kids, and they've been brought up to really care about these topics. So I have found that they're significantly engaged. It's just a matter of sort of having the right programs and harnessing it for sort of hourly, and yes, retention, turnover's high. So for harnessing that hourly associate. And quite frankly, another way we've gotten engagement is metrics and working it into store manager goals, and if it works into your bonus or your compensation structure. Yes, that's not the ideal way to get people engaged, but it gets them engaged, and then when they're focusing on their metrics and their waste numbers and their food donation numbers, they're learning as they go too. So it's sort of forced upon engagement and then rallying the engagement that already exists in the store.
But it also seems like you had some standards, not just around the engagement, but around what needed to be done and an understanding of what the standards were.
Yes, yeah, that was a lot of work. I'm drawing a blank. I'm going to call you BJ. As BJ said, the part around having the standards and the systems and the programs. I've been in sustainability for our department for 7 or 8 years, and we always talked about recycling. We had the baler, we recycled plastic, but it wasn't really, we didn't have, I created a zero waste guidebook and sent it to all the stores, and now the district managers know what to look for and what questions to ask. So it's been teaching a lot of people.
Kate, and I think Catherine, you as well, question for you. If you were sort of queen for a day and could change things in this industry, what would be the handful of things that you would change that would make for a better situation where more food would be recovered, more people would be given the food that they need, et cetera? What kinds of changes, what are the big impediments that you see that are still out there?
It's a really great question, and to be blunt, to do away with the sense of ownership of an issue or of a cause or of maybe donor, or I should say funder in this case, competition. So there's, is this, I think City Harvest is doing a great job in, again, I use that term ombudsperson. We're not getting any increased revenue or, frankly, even food donations around this right now because we were doing a great job in the donation front. But I would be lying if I didn't say there wasn't a question from my development office about why are you doing this? And similarly, I think on the other side of it, of sort of the big tent messaging, I wish we could figure out a way to all kind of work together really well in that tent and in that space. The other thing,
What do you mean by that? Like, what are the kinds of issues that?
Yeah, no, go ahead, you have them. You know. I encourage you to say them.
You can do a duet.
I mean, there are territorial issues. I mean, those have to be broken down, and how to collaborate, and how to work together, and
are we not working at cross purposes, right?
Exactly.
Because if we ultimately are dealing with addressing food waste, are we not reducing the amount of donations that ultimately are going to come to the Emergency Food Network? You know, those are, I think not, but I think it's worth putting that on the table and discussing it frankly and openly.
I mean, many of you were here this morning to hear Doug speak, you know, so Doug is a critical partner with Greater Boston Food Bank. I don't see him as a threat at all. I love his idea. It's an emerging model. It's highly creative. Why not? There's plenty of space. It's not BJ's is my donor, and if you touch that daily lettuce, I'm going to get you. No, there's plenty of food. And I would answer the question very differently. When I think if I was ruler for the day, I would employ every person so they could walk to the front door of a grocery store and buy what they want. You know, so I think that what we're challenged by is we're working in a supply chain that's very different in managing to all the best of our ability to do the best of it. But you want people to be able to walk through the front door, and that's not maybe what we all do, but we're all kind of in that. And so I applaud the workforce development people, and I'm with you, and let's move the wage and all of those things that can be counterintuitive to industry. I sit on a Massachusetts Food Association board, and it's not necessarily pro-livable wage, but you've got to have those partners. You've got to be at the same table together and understand what industry's problems are and challenges.
Do we have the questions from?
He's in the back working them.
Okay.
I don't know
All
his
right.
name.
Well, I'll ask a couple of others that I
He's
have.
sorting them out, I think, for
Okay.
you.
So one of the other things that came up yesterday, which I think is interesting, is this idea that if you have other questions, please feel free to bring them forward. One of the things that came up yesterday that I thought was really interesting and important is that I sit on a number of nonprofit boards, and in the nonprofit world, one of the things that you run into is that you have redundant overhead, right? So you have an accounting group, and you have an accounting group, and there's a whole bunch of other folks who have an accounting group, and you have a trucking organization, and where in this ecosystem can you, and I'm asking this of all of you, where do you think you can create utilities that can take some of these sub-scale, substandard, under-resourced sort of backroom activities and make them into kind of, because it goes back to your cooperation as opposed to competition. Where are those opportunities to actually create some of these utilities that can make this more effective and more scalable?
I think, you know, and Catherine alluded to this earlier, but, you know, because of the size of my organization, you know, 55 million pounds of food, we have a minimum pickup of 50 pounds. So there's many, 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 you know, opportunities, and there's lots of emerging food rescue organizations or, you know, wasted food ventures. And rather than sort of dismiss that, which I'll be honest, about 2 years ago we were, embrace that, give them credibility, give them, you know, it's a parallel conversation to what we were just talking about here in how can retail and businesses learn about you know, strategies to deal with food waste efforts. Doing that with nonprofits and emerging nonprofits, and you know, it's a dog-eat-dog world in the nonprofit space. And so how do we take that in and ultimately try and support those efforts and give them the credibility that's so hard to get, particularly in marketplaces like New York City and Boston?
There are huge opportunities for efficiencies, but you don't have willful partners. It's just too frightening and territorial. So I think 97, 98% of making the deal, I can't speak about Delhaize and Ahold. I can't speak about all, you have equity partners now in the business. Very different models in your companies in the last few years. But 97, 98% is making the deal happen. I mean, the will to do it, the desire to do it. The transaction is easy. I write you a check, you give me a cookie. It's done, right? But there's not the will or the interest among nonprofits to function in a efficient model necessarily. I'm going to go way out on here that I can tell you great efficiencies that could happen in Massachusetts. It's not going to happen. So you have to collaborate. And I think what's interesting is we ask nonprofits to collaborate, but we ask businesses to merge and acquire. It's much tougher to collaborate.
Maybe we need some mergers and
Yeah, maybe.
acquisitions
But
in the space.
Exactly, but the space doesn't allow for that in the same way. There are no golden parachutes, there are no
Yeah.
change of command clauses, those don't happen.
I think to that point, though, and to provide a huge shout out to Love and Spoonfuls, I think where there are great opportunities is to find more organizations like that or help them grow. Because when you've got, if people don't know what Love and Spoonfuls is, they basically have filled in for where the Greater Boston Food Bank was taxed with trying to get out to a BJ's Club in Hudson, which is not close by, 3 times a week, and weren't always getting food when they went. But to have an organization like that that's reliable, that's organized, that has a distribution network that they can rely on, I think if we can build more of that, it definitely takes a piece of the puzzle out and certainly helps the flow happen so that food isn't sitting there getting wasted on our back dock waiting for someone to pick up. So that might be a place where collaboration
Well, we
and
do.
is
We have a
happening.
memorandum of understanding with Love and Spoonful, and it's terrific. And that's exactly what has to happen.
Yeah. And dropping that, I mean, I'm thinking more in terms of 45 food bank partners that we have from Maine to Florida. So like finding those types of organizations and growing them, no pressure. But I think that would be one place where an opportunity exists.
There are other perspectives from the industry on this particular issue. To me, it's interesting that you write a $750,000 check. You probably have some sway then in how that could effectuate change, right? You could create some pressure to actually make some of this collaboration happen. So to me, that's kind of an interesting leverage point for the industry.
Well, and let's not fool ourselves. It helped our business. We were able to open up places where we were having a lot of trouble getting food picked up. Like there was certainly a benefit for us and all of our competitors to have more secured organizations with the resources that they needed to do the pickups that us, Target, Walmart, Kroger, everybody needed to have. Yeah. It's not unique to the Northeast, for sure.
Any other perspectives from the two of you?
In terms of efficiencies, one of the things that I was thinking about, I'm sort of new to this area, the food donations area, but Feeding America, I think, has been really, really helpful with Delhaize in particular in the reporting. Just having, before I think it was very piecemeal, and it was, if we got tracking and poundage and numbers, that was great. It was kind of nice to have, but we're being held accountable to our parent company in Belgium or the Netherlands to literally at the store level be able to say who's participating and how much they're participating. And that feels, I don't know whether it is or not, but it feels very coordinated, and we're getting monthly reports, and that, I guess that helps, what's the word I want? It's more sophisticated because then we can report back to our stores what they're doing. So just reporting and tracking has been, I think it's gotten more efficient and effective.
So interesting. One of the questions from the audience is, are U.S. retailers ready to start publishing their food waste data? This would help government, entrepreneurs, food recovery organizations, et cetera, in tackling the problem. Tesco adopted this in the UK, and it helps to energize the race to zero waste. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll just chime in real quickly on that. I would say no, and but there's an opportunity because I mentioned this in a sort of pre-meeting this morning as we were participating in Feeding the 5,000 in New York City. City Harvest wanted to say, oh, look, passersby, here's your local donors to City Harvest who donate their wasted food or excess food. every single company, as we were getting kind of logo permission, said, no thanks. We don't want our name to be associated with it. But here's why. Because they weren't the first person. They weren't at the top of the list. They were like number 3 or number 4. And so it was interesting in that, I think to the point about data, people either want to be seen, it's all in messaging, right, and marketing. And is this wasted food, or is this, donations, or whatever it is, in a way that spins a positive light on it? I think that there's an opportunity there, and also, for the recognition that it entails. But I would say, so long as, and I understand from one of the sessions earlier, that's just how the industry records it as wasted food, and any waste in this country is seen as bad. So to publicize that is, I think we've got a ways to go.
I don't know exactly what the question is, so I could be naive, but we do have a sustainability report. We do publish how much waste we generate. We do correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but we do publish how much waste we donate, how much we compost. So I guess I'm not sure what we're hiding.
Yeah, but that's not true universally, though, right, Andy? So that's part of the. Maybe the question is best answered by you, and Jennifer. Maybe you can jump. Jessica, excuse me.
BJ. BJ.
No, Jessica.
BJ.
Jessica. I
Sorry.
will get it right.
There are some members who do publish it, and through the Food Waste Reduction Alliance, we do sort of an industry overview of it, so people can get a sense of where the industry's heading. And we actually have that survey for 2016 out in the field right now, and closing down. It can be a sensitive issue, as mentioned. Waste is it is inherently a pejorative word, and people are worried about that. If you are a public company, you have to worry about how people are going to respond to that. And private companies may not always want that. If it makes them look less competitive, if it makes them look less attractive to investors, that's a concern. So it can be a dual-edged sword. It can drive the competition in the sense that we got to do better, but it can also sort of work against that and make people feel like we got to really kind of back off this because we're going to end up not looking good. So I think for where we're at right now, it makes sense for companies that feel comfortable with that push forward and publish it, like other companies that are maybe a little more comfortable being a little more low-key, and let it evolve, because I think it will evolve where eventually, particularly once consumers become more aware of this issue, they'll expect to see a lot of information. So I think that's going to evolve naturally from the process.
Yep. The only thing I would add is just going back to my comment from before about how having zero waste guidelines and standards, I think would be pretty great to help us model programs. BJ's just rolled out SAP, just finished rolling out SAP, so none of our reporting is very good right now. So we do really rely on what Feeding America gives us as far as pounds donated, but as far as that delta between that and zero waste, we don't have clarity on it today. We hope to have it soon, but we couldn't do it today if we were asked.
Do you think the company would be interested in reporting that information or not?
I think we have other things that we want to accomplish in our donation space before we get to publishing our waste data.
Okay, thank you. Andy, there's not a question but more a comment here that says, can you please repeat the amount of the food waste that you quoted and why it's important for the retail industry to put that number out there as the leader in the field?
Sure. So as for every $1,000 of revenue that we generate, we also generate 10 pounds worth of food waste. And of that 10 pounds, about 40% of it's recycled. I think the reason why we thought it was important is when we went out and we formed FWRA and we worked with the other two industries, we explicitly said we're not going to be consumer-facing and we're not going to look backwards up the supply chain towards the farm, because we really had a sense we had to get our own house in order before we could tackle some of these other issues. Tracking this stuff is hard. There's a lot to it, and once you have those good numbers, figuring out how to change and bring them down is also hard. So we wanted to make sure we had that, but we also felt like we had to be transparent about that in order to be taken credibly as we dealt with other groups. We've brought in partners from the NGO side, from other civil society groups. We've also worked with the government. And we think it's important when they come to the table with us that we're open about, here's where we're at, because that's the only way you're going to move forward on it.
Thank you. There's another question here that says, have retailers, word here that uses food excess generators, considered paying for food rescue like they pay for garbage, composting, et cetera?
Yes, we've looked at a lot of models to help with the last amount, that delta piece, but what we recognize is we still need to figure out some areas that we need to donate, frozen and dry. So our effort has been more on donating those items than it has been on taking the next step after that.
Casey, any?
Was the question if we
Have you thought about actually paying for people to pick up the excess food that's still usable, just like you pay right now for the garbage hauler or the compost person, because they're basically giving you the same service?
I don't know that there's been that discussion at my organization. I know that we backhaul a lot of, the stuff that isn't perishable. So that all goes back to our distribution center, so we're hauling that. And then the fresh rescue, I would say we've probably looking into it, maybe the community relations group, but I really can't give you an honest answer on whether or not we would be willing to. I don't know, Catherine, you might know if
Hannaford's
Hannaford's
looking yesterday
looking.
as well, so in the discussion.
I haven't heard much about it myself as an individual yet.
I hope it's fair for me to say that as for-profit businesses and in our model, also in your model, but I think even more so in a wholesale club model, we work on a razor-thin margin. Our margin is like 8%. It's tiny. I think you guys are probably more in the 20s, 30%? No, okay. Oh, okay, so small. So we don't, so in order to generate new line item monies, it has to either save us money somewhere else or be something that we can replace. And so it is often challenging for us to even launch a new advertising campaign that we want to launch and that we know is going to be good without either replacing it with an old one or having new revenue come in from potentially like a consumer packaged goods partner. So I would just say that the idea of paying for something is certainly feasible, and we made a big investment in this program for BJ's. However, when you're dealing with a for-profit company, there does need to be a way to figure out how to make the money work.
Yeah, I think part of the rationale here is the fact that you could get additional tax benefit by having more of that potentially wasted food picked up. And if that were the case, could you share in that tax incentive that you get by paying for the pickup, right? Especially since you're going to pay for the pickup of the compost or the garbage or whatever it is, depending on the state. It seems like you would be saving anyway. I think that was the sort of thought behind the question.
And I think the answer varies between if you're a publicly traded company or a privately held company because of how your debt is structured and what kind of benefits you can take with the tax.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And I do think there's an aspect of that the philanthropy that comes into community, to help. So part of, even the Greater Boston Food Bank gives a couple $100,000 away to agencies for capacity, and some of that comes from retailers, some of that comes from foundations to help. How do you keep building the infrastructure so that you can serve a retailer, 7 days a week, which is the demand now. And it is very expensive to get to the final destination of, I didn't build the food bank system on picking up at 200 stores every day. We built it on receiving tractor trailers coming in every day at 10, 15, 20. It's a very different model. It's a very different system. And it's very expensive. And that's part of why we love our partnership with Love and Spoonful and why we enable program. When I'm spending over $2 a pound to pick up food, it doesn't make sense. Therefore, can you get the pickup closer to the generator? I mean, it's the same concept in composting. soon as you hit that certain mile circle, you're not going to make any money. You've lost your opportunity. So connecting to community, the store to the charity in the community is what we've seen. We have over 4 million pounds of food that gets picked up in community, never touched by the Greater Boston Food Bank. But if someone comes to Wegmans, or they come to Hannaford, or they come to BJ, so.
Another question here has to do with sort of publicity. And the question is, have any of the retailers or retailer representatives, in Andy's case, had a negative result or negative press as a result of donations? So one of the big fears, obviously, is that somebody gets sick, or the liability issue related to food that may be contaminated or whatever. Has that ever been an issue? Because, again, I think this may be from yesterday's workshop as well, because there's a lot of pushback from the in the food recovery world. You probably have seen this, where the retailer or the restaurant or somebody says, hey, I don't want to assume liability, I don't want to have the negative press, et cetera. This was a big deal for Starbucks before they went on this pilot, because obviously they want to protect their brand. Has this been an issue? Is this something that's a real deal, or is it more in the imagination of the retailer?
I'd say that it was the number one question I got. It was the number one battle we fought to get the program launched. We've had 0 issues. And in fact, in some major national recalls that we've been involved with, I think about my 4th of July celebrated 2 years ago, recalling mangoes, making many, many, many phone calls, that it's actually phenomenal to work with Feeding America and the network, because we can make one phone call to them, and mostly they know about every recall, because it's never just a BJ's recall, it's a nationwide recall. And so they've already been alerted to the challenges, and they are already starting to pull products off the shelves. So, in fact, not even one little concern.
I would say similar. I was trying to think if there was a story I hadn't heard about, but I can't recite something that Hannaford's been through in terms of the food rescue, food donations, but at the same time, I can tell you 2 competitors that one was a privately owned company that was not donating, and that negatively impacted, I think, very much so, their, what's the word I'm looking for?
Reputation.
Yes,
Their
thank
brand
you,
reputation.
reputation.
Yeah.
I mean, to the extent that the food bank in that state was coming to us saying, can you put pressure on your competitor, because why in the world would they not be donating? And then actually a competitor in Maine stopped donating. Really bad press, I think, and to the extent that Shelley Pingree, who we saw this morning, put pressure on that organization to donate. So I haven't experienced it on donating and the people getting sick. I've seen it the other way.
Yeah, we agree the same. It's often the biggest fear that's unfounded. Biggest fear that's unfounded, for sure.
So what can be done around that? Because it seems like that's a really significant issue.
Well,
right?
I think, there's that. But, I don't see Monica in the room, but a few months ago, Monica Munn from Rockefeller and Rockefeller convened a roundtable discussion that was, we all know we all know, Feeding America knows too, who the people that aren't donating are. And it's just trying to get them in a room and having like the BJ's or any one of these individuals here and their organizations kind of break down those barriers and those silos and push it and not just accept it anymore that why aren't you doing it? What are the reservations? And being persistent and having people that are somewhat innocuous, like a Rockefeller Foundation or others, start to ask the questions. And then, we wouldn't do this necessarily, but there would be some that start to shame those organizations for not participating in doing good. So I think that's one.
Could the Food Law Policy Clinic help in some way in terms of education around what the liability is, what the law actually says?
I think that they're tangentially, if not directly, involved in that right now.
They are. And
I'm going to go back to it takes the intention and will. If the company has a commitment to do it, they will do it. we've just heard, I've been a food banker since 1979. Never heard of a case, never saw a piece of litigation, never saw a headline, carry $2 million per occurrence in liability, thank you, Feeding America. The insurance companies are all there. Everybody's doing fine. There's never been an incident. And this was even a time when those firewalls weren't there. I remember we got pound cakes donated in San Francisco in 1979. Well, why were they donated? Oh, the machine broke down and we don't know where the bolts are. Oh. We'll find out. So that was what happened in the 70s, right? Give it to those people. They know what to do with it because we don't know where the hell the bolts are. But they got a tax deduction for it. And so things have changed dramatically. Food safety there's a heightened awareness around it. Consumers are aware. We're required to have food safety, and so are these. So I think it's an unfounded excuse that I don't want to do it. Versus there's 7 legal cases that say I shouldn't do it.
So, Andy, is there something that FMI could do here to help with this sort of perspective that's out there? Because this comes out pretty much continually, and especially in the folks who are trying to innovate in the space where they run up against a lot of pressure.
Yeah. When we surveyed our members, this is one, right after infrastructure, this is one of the biggest concerns they have with donating infrastructure. I actually think it's not so much the legal liability, it's the reputational liability that people worry about, particularly our smaller and mid-sized guys who just, and look, it's not unreasonable to fear that if you're associated with a foodborne illness outbreak, that the press is going to hurt you when that happens, even if it's not your fault.
But if there's 0 cases in 50 years, and you have an umbrella of the legal protection,
absolutely,
it just seems like a really interesting mentality that some education could be really helpful there.
And I think, the one thing we always tell people is to do the research. You can go visit the food pantries. You can see firsthand. That's not a commitment. The research is easier to do now than it ever was before. And I think once people see the systems that are in place, they walk away feeling much better about donating, and that reputational concern and even the legal concern becomes less significant. But you even heard, I saw Starbucks do a presentation on it too, and they had sort of a similar concern about that. Is this going to do that? So, but yeah, the research is easy enough to do nowadays. There's no excuse not to do it and answer those questions. And I think we have those resources available on our site. Feeding America has them available on their website. They're accessible if people want to.
Yeah, but that's passive. I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is, can FMI be more assertive to get the membership there? This makes me even more interested in doing the Starbucks case, because I think if we can get that, hey, Starbucks, the reputation of Starbucks is worth, right? The brand name is worth billions of dollars. If they're willing to go through this donation exercise, why is Joe Schmo somewhere with a small company so concerned about their reputation, right? So it's interesting. I just wonder if FMI can take a little bit more of an advocacy role in trying to educate folks.
And we do a lot of webinars with our members on this, with Feeding America, with outside counsel, about both the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act and also how to actually build these donation programs. But no, like I said, there's a lot of work to do. So.
I think, too, that if you think about who our bosses are, they're merchandiser retailers. So their world is not recovery, it's not food, it's about how do I get product from whoever's growing it or manufacturing it onto the stores, marketed it, and sold. And yeah, you know this. So I'm speaking to the choir. But when they think about food safety, they think about massive recalls. They don't think about donating food. And so they go to those scary headlines that are something that can take a whole company down. And so that's where the concern, I think, comes from. They don't understand, there's no equity, I think, in understanding that food donation, there's never been an issue. No one has ever had a headline. They think of more of those recall stories. That's the
kind of a low-risk organization, too, in terms of grocery, right? Grocery retailing.
It's very
when
conservative.
I think of Starbucks, I think trendy, out ahead of the curve, willing to take a risk. I don't know if that's accurate, but just as a consumer. And when I think of grocery stores, in my experience at Hannaford, it's low risk, food safety, make the sales, get the margins. We want to do the right thing for our environment and our company. But I look at you and you sort of pushing that activism is inspiring, but I don't know that all, C-suite leaders are like that in the grocery industry. I welcome them.
It's interesting. It's interesting to me, right? One of the things that I do is I teach in an agribusiness program at the business school, and we bring 200 executives together every year from around the world to talk about topics in food. And one of the things that has really stuck in my head in some research that we're doing for the program is some compilation of attitudes of millennials, right? One of the things that came out of that research, which I thought was really interesting, is the fact that in the last 5 years, well, through 2015, if you took the top 25 U.S. CPG brands and you looked at their market share, right, they've lost $18 billion. Those 25 companies have lost $18 billion in market share. And a lot of it is because of this inability to think about what the millennials are thinking about, what innovation means to those people, how to get outside of the very conservative perspective of what's worked in the past as opposed to what's going to work in the future, because the millennials are now the family formation group that matters, right? So to me, those are sort of interesting things. We're supposed to be finished here. I want to ask one last question, and I ask for your patience. The Congressperson Pingree this morning talked about the date labeling. What's the perspective across the table here on this whole date labeling legislation? Okay, all right. Okay, so it's all going to one person. So just your perspectives on what that means and what you think about the legislation. Maybe we could just go down the line. Maybe you can start.
I'll end. Go ahead. These
Okay.
guys have a lot more to say. Better.
Yeah, I think date labeling in the retail food donation model creates a lot of confusion. It creates confusion with our line level workers who are calling product, storing product, sometimes for a day, and then donating product. So they read, in some cases, they read that code, if they haven't been trained well, to mean I can't donate it. Then you get to the agency or food bank that comes to pick up, usually not in the food bank. The food bank drivers are really well trained, but the agencies are often run by volunteers. So the agency volunteer is new and sees that there's a date, and in their own house they don't have food past a certain date, and so the date confuses them, and they say to the club, I can't take that food because it has a date on it. And so then the club is responsible for then turning it around and throwing it away because we just have to get it out of the space that we need to replenish our food product. And then sometimes you get it to the food bank, if in the case of the ones that go to the food bank, and the person that's either the pantry or whomever who's picking the food to eat it is also concerned about the date. And I find that date labeling just creates way more confusion than it does provide any benefit to the successful end of life of our product that's already at the end of its life. And so I've talked to Emily a little bit about anything that we can do to support the legislation, because I think this may be the first step in many steps, but I'm very, very, very supportive in that first step because it, I think, will help a lot in the retail space.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo what you said. I think it's complex and confusing, and it seems to have varying interests in mind. And with being headquartered in Maine and having Shelley Pingree from Maine, we've worked with her on it, and I'd like to see it move forward somewhat.
Two things I want to say on that. We absolutely support it. I think that the two labels is fantastic. What's concerning to me is, the great work that Emily did, or the center did here, to dispel or to make clear that there is no, some states are doing their own thing. I was at a city council hearing in New York. They're eager beavers looking to do something, make a name for themselves, thinking about creating a New York City label. And right, of course it is, right? But we adamantly said, absolutely not, you cannot do that. But because the system doesn't exist, you could see a lot of that happening. The other thing, it occurred to me in listening to all of this, I remember, I'm not in our, distribution a lot, except during Hurricane Sandy I was, and I remember seeing all these letters come in that encouraged, we had to distribute it with the product that said, even though the label says this, disregard it, it's good for at least this long. I haven't even thought of that in 4 years since it's been Sandy, but that's interesting to me, that like in times like that, we get those letters to distribute, but no other time.
Yeah,
Can we quickly get Andy and then have you close off for us? Yeah.
Sure. Well, actually, FMI released some research last week as part of our trends report that was a little bit surprising. It was, I believe, 64% of consumers said that they consider date labels important in their purchasing decisions. And they actually had a pretty good understanding of best by, sell by, use by as sort of a ascending order of safety, of quality up to safety. What I think was kind of shocking about it is their view of how safe a product was after the date of use was really skewed from reality. So I'm trying to do this from memory, but there was something like 54% who said they wouldn't essentially eat a product more than 3 days after a best by date. And it was up to 75% by use by. So
obviously the industry's confused.
yeah. And I would say, I don't think there's any doubt that they're confusing. FMI is working with GMA as part of a task force to kind of come up with an industry-wide position on that that's ongoing. So to be a little bit cagey about what I say about it, because it's not been approved, but that process is underway, and we talked with both Senator Blumenthal and Representative Pingree on their bill, and we thought it was a very thoughtful
So
approach.
in closing this issue, I think it's time for reform in education. It's a different manufacturing environment, and the role of fresh and the types of ingredients that are in the outer aisles of the store are enormous, and the ability to just re-educate the public like we do on so many things. This would be a huge opportunity to keep food in the homes of people, or to get food. And I don't know the implications fully on the industry. I'm sure there are in terms of move and turn of product. But I think it's time for reform and education of our public.
Okay, I want to thank all of the panelists, and I want to apologize for talking about it. Thank you all very much. Enjoy your reception.